Hi, everybody.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, I'll start again. Everybody, welcome back. We're glad you're here. I'm Brian Ricks.
And I'm Aaron Steele. Welcome back to Core Solutions of Lync Server 2013. Right now, we're going to start talking about conferencing in Lync 2013. So,
yay!
Conferences! So, we're going to cover this in a fairly quick session, all in all. I'm hoping I can do a demo a little later if the demo gods have been appeased. So we're going to start with an introduction to Conferencing Server 2013. We're going to talk about what that looks like when you're designing audio and video for web conferencing and how that sort of impacts things. We're going to talk about just in general what the dial-in conferencing experience looks like in Lync Server 2013. And then we're going to talk a little bit about managing and administering that same experience.
Okay.
First thing to note, the conferencing modes, and are there any conferencing features that have changed? We'll look into how the scheduling infrastructure works and what changes happen there, how the join launcher works, what in-conference collaboration looks like. Here's a good one, Office Web Application Server. So this is a new role that isn't a Lync role, but that Lync consumes of a SharePoint deployment. So it's a piece of a SharePoint deployment that Lync consumes a role of to render PowerPoints in a shared application.
Yeah, and keep in mind that it is what it is by the Office team. It's their product. It's used for other things, Exchange, SharePoint. So Microsoft is leveraging. They're leveraging the existing technology. I think the comment I heard was, we don't create PowerPoints, we don't develop PowerPoints. Might as well let the team that does
Render
and render what they can,
yep.
and we do gain a lot from it, so it is a big advantage as well. So
yeah, definitely. We'll talk about the topology impacts of that Office Web App Server integration. Here's a big ask that people have been having since Lync 2010 that had a little bit of a hack for it, which was conference dial-out for non-enterprise voice-enabled users, and archiving and then deployment and migration considerations. So the conferencing modes for Lync Server 2013 from 2010 didn't really change, right? We've still got audio and video conferencing. We've still got web conferencing. We still have dial-in conferencing. It really is simply mentioning that dial-in conferencing here is a fairly important feature and capability of the product, and we're going to talk a little bit about that more in a future session. So. Any ideas or thoughts here? I mean, it is what it is in 2010, right?
Yeah, I mean, you get what
There's
you get.
new functionality in the 2013
yes.
world about that video conference, but the basics are still it's audio and video conference.
Right.
So we have new client features in Lync Server 2013 when it comes to conferencing. New conference administration features that have been definitely asked for. Conference participation feature changes and presenter feature changes. So from a client perspective, the scheduling infrastructure has changed a little in that it's a little simpler and a little easier for the end users to interact. The join launch experience is definitely improved with 2013. We gave the users a Join Conference Now button inside of their Outlook client.
In the pop-up. Yeah.
In the pop-up, as well as if they were to open the invite itself, there's a menu ribbon bar that shows Join Conference Now.
Yeah, or they can click the hyperlink, or I mean, there's like 15 ways to do it.
Yep.
Whatever appeases you, go for it. Just get into the meeting.
And I believe even clicking the Join link in the meeting invite won't spawn the web browser.
For 2013.
Yep. So video enhancements, we're really talking about that multi-party video, our interpretation of the 5-party HD video stream Brady Bunch view, or Hollywood Squares, however you want to call it.
Whatever you want to call it. And it's a big deal for a lot of people. But again, just remember, you got what you asked for, so there's a big impact by having a lot
there's
of big
bandwidth bandwidth
right.
in those conferences, definitely. We now give you a little more customization, and there is administration features at the server layer that will alter how that meeting scheduling happens. You can give people a help link. You can give people additional. There's an icon you can add, and hopefully I'll be able to show some of that in the demo. Dial-out conferencing for enterprise voice-enabled users is a big ask that we had. In 2010, this had to be done with static routes, and then you couldn't apply policies, and you had this extra way for people to use your phone system that you didn't expect. In Lync 2013, what we've done is a user, even if they aren't enterprise voice enabled, can still get enterprise voice policies applied to them such that you are still, as the admin, in control of what numbers they call, right? In a 2010 world, you weren't in control of what numbers they called. A user could start up a conference, and if you had turned these features on, they could place a call to any number.
Which fixed the problem and created a problem at the same time.
Yep.
Potentially. Right?
Yep. Created abuse, a potential for abuse. In Lync 2013, the one kicker here, though, is you have to apply those policies via PowerShell.
That's right. And because the users are grayed out in Control Panel because they're not enterprise voice enabled.
Yep.
But you can't apply those voice policies directly to any user or group of users.
Yep. User, group of users, site, things like that. You can apply those
by default,
EV
that's what
policies.
they've got. It's also, you could set it to everybody's their default when you're first provisioning users, and then you override that with something else. But again, new creates, that's not the, I mean, there's things to consider, right?
Yep.
So
but it is there.
It is an option.
Yep. Because the Lync client comes with Office, it is a little better in that regard from a conference point of view in that you've got the Lync client just because you've got Office.
Right. And you can utilize the bits for rendering and presenting what you're doing without actually needing to be a Lync person.
Yep, yep. So presence while sharing. So we've improved this on a single screen view. When you start presenting and sharing in a Lync conference, your presence will go into a do not disturb state with presenting as the status.
Right. Which is, you say, wow, that's nice, I guess. D&D's D&D, but it's not, especially for those that are set to be urgent interruptions only, or those that are your colleagues, because they'll see urgent interruptions. Oh, by the way, I'm presenting.
They might not.
Maybe this really not as urgent as you thought it was, or as funny of a joke as you thought it was.
Right.
So it gives you a little bit more information, and the automation is really nice, nice to have.
One thing to note about that is if you have multiple screens and you're presenting in a presenter view, that interaction doesn't kick in.
That's right.
Because we've now determined that your second screen
should be what you're presenting on.
Should be what you're presenting on. We will let you be interrupted. It doesn't put you into a presenting or a D&D state. You're in fact just busy because you're in a meeting.
Right. And just remember that. And the first time I saw it, just a year ago or so, I thought it was broken. I was like, I'm presenting. Why isn't it presenting? And it was because I had both my monitors up. And then it was one of those things where, forget about it. And go to a client and have my laptop all by itself. It's working. And then, I think I remember hearing something about this, and sure enough. So just keep in mind, if you're sharing your desktop, you're presenting because you're doing something, but you got dual monitors, you aren't uninterruptible. Interruptible.
You can be interrupted.
To be interrupted. There you go. Because you have a second monitor. But I would also say make sure if you are sharing desktop and you are presenting in that mode and presenting, share your second monitor. Keep your Lync notifications and email notifications on the primary monitor, so that's 90% of the issue.
Yeah,
right? So.
Yeah, that's why it was done.
Right.
We've given users a little more control to view and show participant lists and interact with their Lync client and sort of get the experience they want out of that conference.
And the large conferencing is automatically chosen to be what we're going to be going to. So anything over 75 participants, we're saying, you know what, you don't need to see this user list.
Yeah, just hide it.
Just hide it. It's more cumbersome, and the updates of presence are more task.
Way more taxing on the server
than anybody's using it anyway.
Yep.
So.
Yep. We give presenters during a conference the ability to much more cleanly manage what content is being shared and what content is out there to be shared. There is now the idea that you can both share content as well as change and be a leader of the meeting, different from just sharing in the meeting. Again, presence while sharing, and then there's a dedicated presentation mode that the Lync client will drop into.
Especially if you hit that Windows P button, it just knows that you're now in presentation mode, and off it goes. So,
yeah. So, from a scheduling and infrastructure change, what we did in the Lync control panel and via PowerShell, we've given you the ability to both specify a URL for a logo, a URL for help, a URL for a legal disclaimer, and some custom footer text that you want to set on all Lync conferences that are scheduled using the add-in.
Yeah. It's a great first step. A lot of clients love the fact there's something, it's just that it's not completely customizable still, and it's customizable only by what Microsoft has pushed out. This reaches, I think, 80%, if not more, of what the requests were. So it's great. But when we say you can customize your meeting invites, don't get overly excited that you can customize anything like putting in an ACP or something of that nature.
Exactly.
It's not. That isn't the intent. The intent is to add a little company flair to your meeting invites.
Yeah, you can sort of see what we're doing in here is we're modifying a lot of this portion of the text, right? And we're giving people a logo, some custom footer text. We're very possibly giving people a help link.
And while it may be a little, I won't say annoying, that you're having to reference a URL, make sure they're publicly accessible URLs. But it does help overall, especially with logos and content and information. One change in one place updates all futures, and even existing if they go and re-pull that information. And it also keeps the emails at a smaller size because it's just URLs. There's no actual logos embedded within that. So.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So Join Launcher, we'll talk a little bit about this on the next few slides. I actually walk through the different scenarios of how that Join Launcher functions and what it actually does in your environment when you try to click on that link and how that interaction happens, because it's a little sort of particular about if you've got directors or don't have directors in your environment. So the Join Launcher detects and launches that Lync client based on you clicking on a link like meet.contoso.com or something like that. It launches the Lync web app or the Lync full client, and then it constructs the actual SIP URI of that meeting from the HTTPS join URL that you've just clicked on. We do support launching mobile clients as long as the Lync server is higher than 2010 CU4, and the clients on Win 7, Android, and iOS support that same feature. You'll get a join meeting link in your calendar invite on the phone device.
Yeah, very convenient. From a voice and now from Windows, from our new 2013, from a data potentially in video consumption, but a single join button, everybody loves.
Yeah, right? You don't have to remember that conference bridge anymore. You don't have to interact with those things. You hit join meeting now, and you are coming in as an authenticated user into that meeting, whether it has to call you back or not.
Right. Either way, at least you don't have to sit there and fiddle. Obviously, it's nice to have regardless, but if you're driving or moving somewhere or having someone else hit your join button for you so that you can take the device, it's that much easier and convenient. So anything to make things easier for you, that's what we're here for.
So we're going to walk through these few scenarios about what happens depending on if you've got a director in your environment or not, about how that join launcher works. The thing to remember, though, here is, in fact, this is all after that has gone through the transparent reverse proxy. Right, so your link resolves, this link for meet.contoso.com/Joe and his meeting ID, in fact, resolves to the reverse proxy. The reverse proxy simply redirects and passes it on to the director in this case, in this scenario. What happens, though, is that director actually figures out and takes the URL, forms a conference out of that and a SIP URI, and then proxies and gets that data from the correct pool, and then acts as a proxy for all clients connecting in and using that director.
Yeah, and with 2013, well, in 2010, because you are a user on a specific server within a pool, it has the ability to actually hit your server where the actual conference. It's very specific and unique and gets you your conference.
Yeah, very clean.
Conference.
Very clean. Whereas when you look at this without a director in the same mode, the hardware load balancer or the reverse proxy that's resolving this is going to have simply one point that it is pushing at when it is talking through the reverse proxy.
Right, we have to start somewhere.
We have to start somewhere,
Right.
and we don't actually redirect the end user's interaction.
That's right.
It hits whatever pool that reverse proxy talks to, and that pool, in fact, proxies it to the organizer's pool for data transit.
Then really the only way to address a separation of some sort, because it is one URL we're going to, is to have some type of global load balancers that you deployed. And then potentially, depending on region or however you define them, you could potentially have different entrance points, but you could still be being directed to a pool that's in a different region if that's where the conference is.
If that's where the organizer scheduled it. Exactly. We join and consume conference resources based on where the organizer organized that conference.
That's right.
It's a little redundant. Organizer organized.
Well, he is organizing the
Yeah.
So, moving along.
Coexistence. Now we're really talking about what happens when you start introducing Lync 2013 pools in coexistence with Lync 2010 directors and Lync 2010 pools. And there's this thing that actually in fact happens, which is you send the request through the director, but because the 2010 director can't proxy the 2013 conferencing content, it in fact redirects and sends you directly, and then the meet URL and what you're speaking to is directly to the front end pool where the conference is homed.
Yeah, not as efficient, especially if you're somewhere else. Then you're talking back and redirecting back around. You're not taking your local entrance. Your egress point's different.
Yep.
But that's how it works. So with 2010, things get a little bit different.
Yeah, and the experience to a conference hosted on the Lync 2010 pool is very similar. It happens in that same way. Once you start talking hybrid, now we've got a shared SIP namespace and we've got conferencing enabled in both namespaces. So if an online user organizes a conference, all right, I'm going to hit the meet.contoso.com URL.
Which points to my on-prem.
That's going to resolve to my on-prem director, which is going to run, in fact, a SIP get conference in action against the on-prem pool. Right?
Because he doesn't know any better.
Exactly.
Right?
That's what he's
normally going to do. Right.
That server sends the same request, if it can't resolve it, sends that same request out to the Lync online pool via its federation channel.
This is an edge communication like any other.
Yep. When it resolves and returns and knows that the conference is hosted on the Lync online pool.
I may sneeze here in a moment.
Okay. When it knows that that conference is hosted on the Lync online pool, it brings back and sends that user the redirect, and an HTTP proxy happens so that they are now hitting the online director and the conversation no longer hits the on-prem world.
Yeah, and that's really nice when you want your conferences to be in the cloud. And I've even had clients that have decided to put some of their larger conference user consumers in the cloud and let that kind of leverage the cloud space for their conferencing.
Yeah, and if you're doing Office 365 dedicated, you get a little more control over that. But once you're starting to deal with conferences in the 250 user range or more, the cloud doesn't support it.
That's right, and things get a little, once they get fairly large, they get a little persnickety.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
Yeah, so there's definitely some work that's happening in the background that the Lync server team and the Skype team are doing to make the on-prem or the online world a lot more capable as a conferencing provider. So this is talking about in-conference collaboration. It's really talking why we had to implement the Office web app server. It's that we got to a place where we wanted to adopt that standard web technology, DHTML, JavaScript over HTTP GETs, remove some of the state-based work out of it, such that the web application companions technology of a web application server, right? This is why you'll sometimes see in our documentation, we refer to it as a WAC,
and a WAS and a WAP
OWA.
and that's the new one for me. But yes, there's a lot of names for this WAC server.
Yeah.
And it's actually references WAC within the topology builder.
Yep.
But, yeah.
But this is a technology that we're using and leveraging to drive that PowerPoint presentation. And as Brian said, the Lync team decided they aren't, in Lync 2010, they were actually writing a PowerPoint rendering engine for PowerPoints, and they decided that that wasn't the direction they were really shooting for.
Yeah, and a lot of people are asking in the forums here regarding this WAC role. Is it Lync specific? Can I share it with other SharePoints exchanges?
Yeah.
How do I?
So in fact, for Lync to consume it, it's simply specifying the internal and external URL of that web apps farm. From a perspective of a capacity point of view, it's in fact almost recommended that you share that Office web app server between your Lync server, your SharePoint server, and your Exchange server, because that'll let you take advantage of some of those economies of scale.
Right, and Exchange Outlook Web Access loves it. It can utilize it for rendering documents, inline browsing. Obviously, SharePoint uses it for its native editing
and editing. So
right. So
this is
as
a
long as you're
license.
licensed for it.
There's a licensing question here.
Right.
It's an interesting little perspective on it. You don't, in fact, have to have anything other than a server license to install Office Web App Server and run it for Lync only.
As a read-only.
Because it's a read-only presentation of that document. As soon as you need to introduce the ability to change that document, which can't be done when it's being presented by SharePoint or by Lync, but can be done if you go to the SharePoint and open that document directly, it needs to be licensed, and it has CAL and licensing implications.
Yep.
One of the other great features here is because we're leveraging that DHTML and JavaScript, is we get a lot better multi-platform support, right? Since we aren't leveraging this old archaic technology and the rendering engine in Lync 2010. We don't have any dependency on PowerPoint Viewer or Silverlight because of this change, which is great. And there's no custom packaging and depackaging where we're sending out the blob that is this PowerPoint presentation and then encrypting it on the local PC so that it can be displayed locally.
What about now for backwards compatibility for 2010 clients joining your meeting? How do they receive the PowerPoint?
They're able to receive it and interact with it in the same ways as a 2013 client can. It's just not through the same method.
That's right. So we're not using the WAC server for their presentation.
Right.
They're using the old delivery method concepts. So,
but in fact, it's the Office Web App server that's doing the work for them to be able to consume that.
Right. It's doing the compiling, pushing it back to the file share. They're grabbing it like normal. They don't know the difference, but it's a different process that's making it happen.
It is. It is.
But you'll definitely get the best user experience if everybody's 2013 or even the web version.
Yep. And yeah, here WAC server farm is providing that centralized web viewing and possibly editing of Office documents. And really, for most environments, we expect that it would be shared amongst Lync, Exchange, and SharePoint servers. What I've seen at customers, though, is Lync is the first thing that's driving it as a need. Because here's a good thing to remember. In a Lync 2013 environment, if you don't have Office Web App servers deployed, PowerPoints cannot be shared. PowerPoint application can. PowerPoints themselves cannot be shared.
That's right.
It turns it off.
You have to have this. It is part of. It's a requirement.
Yep.
Just accept it. Move on in life. You need a WAC server if you're going to deploy 2013. So.
Yep. So this talks about the sequence of those things that interact when you're actually sharing and then viewing and consuming that PowerPoint. So first action is the user uploads that file, right? We upload it into the conferencing web server. It saves the file out to the file share. That gives us our backwards compatibility, right? And then we actually get that file back from that file share that we sent it to. We send that file to the WAC server, right? First, we let's see, save file, 2, 3. We present the file. Now we're presenting it. Now we broadcast the URL with that file ID and an authentication token. The consumer and viewer of it through the WAC server gets the HTTP broadcast URL, goes way back over and gets the file from the file share, renders it and pulls it to the WAC server, and then sends down the DHTML and HTTP over HTTP into that viewer.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of moving parts when things are going on here.
It definitely is it is a lot of moving parts, but the benefits definitely outweigh the challenges of it.
Okay, excellent. And I agreed 100%. Until you first time you set one up, you get the presentation going, and then you start streaming audio and live video within it. It's the most amazing thing to see how well it works, and all of those complications that we've had in the past of trying to share a desktop to share video and audio, which doesn't work well at all, are now resolved. So,
yeah, it enabled a lot better functionality for us in that world. So when we're talking about this from an enterprise edition point of view, we talked about topology impacts. That is, when you've made the decision to deploy enterprise, you've made that decision because you want high availability and scale, right? So it natively translates that you probably want that same capability and scale in your Office web app farm. So we do talk about a WAC farm, an Office web app server farm, proxied by redundant reverse proxies. You've still got edge servers in your environment. You've still got AD servers. You still require that file share. None of that stuff goes away, right? You still need all those things, but you've introduced this additional Office web app server. And it definitely should be noted that that Lync leverages a very small portion of what a WAC server does.
Yeah, very small.
Yeah.
One specific functionality of the server itself.
Yeah, most definitely. When you're looking to size your WAC servers are sized like SharePoint servers. So you go look up what a SharePoint 2013 server requires from an infrastructure perspective, and you can size that as your WAC.
And when we say farm, think of pool, farm, it's the same concept. Yeah. Cluster, farm, pool, it's all interchangeable terms.
And in this case, a pool and a farm are very, very interchangeable. Again, because this is an HTTP protocol, it's got load balancing involved.
Yep.
When you're talking standard edition, it means, though, that you can no longer do a single box Lync deployment for 2013. Even if you don't want HA, you don't want DR, you don't need any of that stuff. You used to be able to deploy a single Lync 2013 or 2010 server in standard edition with a single AD domain controller and get the functionality. You've now introduced, at the very least, you need to virtualize and have one WAC server available so that your users can consume, share, and interact with PowerPoints. Do we have a question coming from the...
Actually, we can answer live. Can the WAC server present other Office types other than just PowerPoint?
So the WAC server definitely supports it. Lync, in fact, only uses it for the PowerPoint content.
That's right. So the WAC server itself can, yes, present Excel files, Word files, PowerPoint files, PDF files. It can render them into a viewable...
That DHTML JavaScript view.
So that's all great from a WAC server perspective, or WAS server, or whatever you want to call the server, the companion server. But Lync will only use the PowerPoint. That's all we're using it for.
Right. If you try to upload a Word document into your conference, it's going to be a downloadable thing where every user is going to download and consume locally a version of that piece of that file rather than rendering it in a web view. So when we talk about external access, it definitely introduces this idea that we now have a lot more interaction with the reverse proxy, and you've definitely got some potential sizing concerns with your reverse proxy if you're going to be doing a lot more work and a lot more push of data through that Office web app farm. But again, it's still SIP and S4 to get that thing initiated, and then it's S4 over HTTPS. S4 is just another protocol that we have and that we've used actually for a long time in the Lync server world. Mm-hmm. It's generally what's used for client requests and client interactions.
Yeah, there's a couple. SIP's the main one to remember. your CPPP or CPPP, you've got S4, you've got various, but SIP's what everything's, remember SIP if nothing else.
Yeah. So we're now really talking about conference dial-out for non-voice enabled users. This is a major improvement from the 2010 world. So let's see.
And when we say this, we're talking about the organizer of various things.
Is the organizer, because it always depended on, is the organizer enterprise voice enabled? That is, can the organizer call and join a participant over their phone line?
Right. And it's all, exactly. Okay.
So user initiates that conference dial out, right? So, and in the 2010 CU4 world, we simply said, is that a mobile client, right? If it was a mobile client, we use their voice policy, right? If that meant they had to be enterprise voice enabled to get that mobile client to do all that work. That was the only interaction that was supported in Lync Server 2010 to get enterprise user dial out in a conference. In 2013, we now go into this, is the user anonymous workflow, right? Meaning, is it an anonymous user that has joined this conference and now wants the conference to call them back? If yes, we go and pull that organizer's voice policy and use that to decide if that number that was attempted to be dialed can be dialed.
All right, so if you're conceptually having somebody organize a meeting, a dial-in conference, and they can call anywhere unrestricted, that means they can call anybody back unrestricted.
Yep, so an anonymous user who joins their conference will get in and can hit a button that says call me back and can dial any number in the world.
And you may think that's awful, but think about it this way. I, as that user, could go and say add user, type in a phone number, and dial them just the same. And it's using my dialing rights. So it's the same concept, same users, same roles and functions, just making it user-friendly is what we've done.
Much more. We get into, there's that workflow here where we ask, is the user anonymous? If that's answered no, we try to actually figure out if the user is federated, right? If they're, meaning, can we find out if the user who's attempting to participate in that conference has a voice policy? This says federated EV. I think it actually means enterprise voice enabled. So for if I am in a conference and I'm in another Microsoft conference, when I try and do the dial out, it in fact uses my voice policies to do that dial out, not the conference organizer's policies.
Yeah. So if I'm joining your meeting, I'm Microsoft joining a Microsoft meeting, I want to call back, it's based off my voice policies, not the organizer's policies at that point.
Yep. So it is good to understand these interactions and understand how these interactions dictate the changes and the choices your users are able to make, but it's definitely an improvement and doesn't open yourself up to nearly the level of toll fraud that you had in 2010.
Right.
So conference archiving. The big change here, though, isn't so much, so to speak, on the Lync side, as it's a speak to the fact that we are now interacting with and storing that conference data in Exchange.
Optionally. Yeah. We have the option to.
Yes. Yeah. So it's this.
And why would we want to do that?
It gives the administrators and people who are doing searches against the Exchange environment to be able to pull back conference data as well in their compliance searches.
Right. All the archiving and compliance stuff. Think about it. If a user is going to the new SharePoint portal, doing a compliance search, it's going to search SharePoint and it's going to search Exchange. It doesn't search Lync and the Lync databases, but if the content of Lync is in Exchange, well, there you go. You're going to get it back either way. So it's to ease the compliance people's needs. Yeah.
And Exchange has implemented a very robust compliance role procedure and a compliance sort of model. So the thing to remember here is this interaction, as it's described on this slide, only works if the users and their mailboxes are hosted on Exchange 2013. If they aren't hosted on Exchange 2013, the archiving of that conference data must happen down here to that optional archiving data for users without Exchange.
And that's also important to know on-prem. So Exchange Server 2013 on-premise is required for this to make it work.
Yes, yeah. Most definitely. And you'll see what happens, and this still is constrained by the same requirements about what gets archived for a Lync conference from 2010. There hasn't been any major introduction of addition to the feature set of what gets archived in a conference, right? The TechNet article out there is pretty accurate about what gets conference archived and what doesn't. So, last but not least, when we're talking about deployment and migration, it's really looking at how do we deploy and roll this out. And one of the common modes we see this rolled out and deployed in is turning on that web conferencing first, turning on AV conferencing next, turning on those audio and join when using PSTN features, and last but certainly not least, turning on that external join. And then from a migration point of view, it's really about migrating users based on their conferencing needs. So, yeah, there's really not a ton to think about when you're migrating conferencing, but it is important to remember that you will have to migrate their existing conferences and meetings.
Or they start new.
Yeah, they won't know they have to reschedule them if you do that.
This is true. Also, well, we probably get into the migration side, the 2007 to 2013 migrations and conferencing. But it's not a pretty story.
No,
So,
it's the story we've got from 2007 to 2010, but there was a capability that was introduced in 2010 that was removed in 2013 that really, there was a
backwards compatibility.
backwards compatibility meeting service that was running on the 2010 server that we didn't forward port into 2013. Now we get into talking about the design and how we talk and design for audio and video conferencing, and this really gets into a little more of why.
We have a question for you.
Sure.
Conferencing policies, user-based policies, do they take precedence over group and organization-based policies?
Most definitely. If a user has been granted a direct user policy, those will always take effect. The most granular policy in the Lync world always takes effect.
And they're not cumulative policies.
Nope,
So
they're replaced.
They replace.
It's a fully replaced, but
Well,
the
you're
most
getting
granular
a
one
policy,
gets. Yep.
Right? So whatever policy that gets, it can get confusing from an Active Directory perspective. It's not like that. When you're getting a policy, whatever's closest to you, most granular, you're going to get. So if there's a user policy, yes, that's the
Right.
question.
If there's a global policy, everybody gets it. If there's a site policy, people in that site get that.
And not the global.
Overriding whatever was in the global. And if there's a user policy that's been specifically granted to users in that pool, they will get, or in that site, they will get that policy to the exclusion of the other ones that were applied.
Right.
So, we're really talking about, and this is intended to be a little more interactive, we're talking a bit about why you might need to turn on compliance. And when you talk about this, there's actually a very well laid out workflow on TechNet for deploying and configuring conferencing that walks you through a very, very well-reasoned article about gathering these requirements and defining your requirements before you deploy conferencing. Because just turning on conferencing won't necessarily meet the needs, right? It's this almost a chicken and egg thing with with conferencing and compliance. So
Yeah, I would say just in general, knowing to know what you need to know prior to turning things on is an important step in getting the compliance to be what it needs to be.
most definitely.
And taking things away are crazy hard to do.
Completely agreed, but because you're implementing compliance to meet probably a regulatory need, it would behoove you to understand that need and implement the policies correctly.
From the get-go.
From the get-go. If your interpretation of the policy says all voice communication must be archived, it's entirely possible that'll lead you to turning off conferencing in Lync.
Right, since we can't capture it.
Right.
That's what it is, right? And but again, to Aaron's point, it's understanding. It goes back to everything we've been talking about from a planning, decision, understanding perspective. You've got to gather the business requirements, understand what the requirements are, and then build the solution around the requirements, and not the other way around. Don't let Lync dictate the requirements. Let the requirements, the business requirements, dictate how we implement Lync.
Yeah. And when we're talking about how do different conferencing modalities affect the network usage, this really gets down to understanding your users and your user modes. If your users do a lot of one-to-one video conferencing today, they will probably do a lot of one-to-many video conferencing in the future.
Because they can. And if nothing else, just definitely because they can initially. Maybe it'll be something that's like a new toy.
It may taper off.
But expect a spike, and that's also another reason to figure out your pilots and get the, know what your utilization is during your POC. Extrapolate that out as you need to for your users, and maybe you're only ramping up 5% of the user population at a time because you just can't load or don't want to size to load what the spikes are because it settles down.
Yep, most definitely. And then it was good to remember, and thank for the person who brought it up. Use the policies that are available there in Lync to control the rollout. It definitely helps you when you can turn on conferencing for a group of people and give some of those people large conference support, some of those people audio and video support, some of those people anonymous dial out.
Question. The question was, to clarify, the WAC part of PowerPoint, if you don't define a WAC server in PowerPoint, then, within the topology, and you deploy the topology and everything's working, only PowerPoint sharing, and that would be uploading and sharing PowerPoints, is unavailable. The other part of sharing is all going to work.
Correct.
Right. And we'll also state that it is, when you're running through the wizard, you have to put something in the WAC field.
But if it can't, so the catch is, you've put a thing in the WAC field and you haven't gone through the further steps of turning that server on, getting its certificates, defining the Office Web App farm, the Office Web App host. That's when you will start up the Lync client and you will go to share, and PowerPoint won't be an option.
That's right. And just understand, you're going to see all these errors in the logs every so often saying, I can't connect to PowerPoint, still can't connect to the WAC server, it's not going to be an option. That's Lync trying to connect. But if that's an acceptable loss, feature loss, then yes, that is an option.
So now we're talking about why would you choose hosted versus on-prem conferencing. And really where I get to is, I sort of think about this is, if I need those really granular and really complex controls over my on-prem conferencing, it's very possible that I will need to do that. Some of those help URLs, some of those logo URLs, if I've got a large deployment of many pools and I want to send out unique help URLs or unique logos on each of those invites, that's not doable in a tenant. I get one setting per tenant, whereas in the Lync server, I can change some of those settings based on a pool or a site.
Right. We keep in mind that Lync was originally not designed to be multi-tenant, and there's a lot of work has gone in from the hosting team, and very, kudos to being able to get as much multi-tenant features as they have within the product, both in Exchange and within Lync. But again, both were not designed out of the gate to be such. And so some of the things you have to give up because they just aren't able to be multi-tenantorized. That's my word.
Set up, yeah, multi-tenant capable.
Okay, that too.
So, and we've talked about this previously, you really have to understand your requirements for archiving and conferencing, because there's something to be said for Switzerland requires its compliance records to be archived locally. Right? So if you've turned on your tenant for compliance, can you guarantee those records are going to go to Switzerland?
No.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So there are countries where deploying Lync conferencing in the cloud isn't a viable solution today.
Right, because you have to guarantee where solutions. Similar question of being, if you were doing it yourself on premise and you had a single Exchange server in Germany, could you, in fact, archive to Exchange? Well,
No.
then no, you wouldn't. You would have to actually set up a different policy, a different solution, probably a SQL server,
Yep.
or another Exchange, I guess, is an option, up within Switzerland and let them keep their own stuff. So,
Yep.
but we could. We have that power to control it on-prem. We don't in the cloud.
Right, much more power to control that on-prem. So here's just a little screenshot of all the different pieces that we've got in a conferencing policy. Right? How many participants we can have in a meeting? Can those participants invite anonymous users? What level of recording is enabled? Can anonymous and federated people record? Right?
Right.
What type of IP video do we want? Here's that one, allow participants to dial out.
Yeah, if that option isn't even checked, then the previous discussion just disregard because it doesn't even matter. But if it is checked, that's what matters.
Here's one that's important about bandwidth. Allow multiple video streams. If you're in a bandwidth-constrained environment, you may want to restrict yourself back to the old Lync 2010 model of a single video, a single active, and a single listener video stream.
Right. Yep.
Turning on data collaboration, that is, what pieces do you want to allow in there?
Yeah. Do you want to do desktop sharing? Do you not? Do you want to do app sharing? Do you not?
Do you want to do annotations, PowerPoint, polls?
All the data stuff that's using the data MCU.
You can turn those all on, and again, we can turn those on at a pool level, at a user level, and globally. When you're designing audio and video and web conferencing policies, you really have to talk about scaling for video. And when you're scaling for video, you need to make sure you recognize that desktop and application sharing scale in a very similar way to video. You have to definitely understand what meeting size does to your environment. If your participants do a lot of content download or file transfers in their conferences, that's definitely going to impact your design of not only how many servers you're deploying, but the network bandwidth between them. It's going to impact how much data store you have in your file share. And then again, PSTN dial in and dial out. There are cases where, depending on these decisions, you may in fact want to turn off PSTN dial out because of a compliance or regulatory reason that wants you to archive some of the data. So simple URLs.
Yeah, existed in 2010,
Haven't-
existed in 2013.
And haven't really changed.
No, not at all.
No.
Still three of them.
Still three, and that third one, I don't really consider it optional. What I consider it is do not present to the internet.
Right. I mean, that's on your internal only. Ideally, your certificates are not including it that are on the outside.
Yep.
But optional is that really, I mean, technically, I guess you don't need it, but not
Yeah.
a good idea.
No.
Not a good idea.
No, you really need to turn on that admin URL so that people don't necessarily have to install the Lync control panel to be able to use the environment. It is definitely important to remember, though, that all of these simple URLs are part of the driving force behind split-brain DNS. Do you, as the as the admin who's running the network, really want to force all users to hairpin out and hit the outside of the reverse proxy when they're trying to join and click a meet URL? Is that the experience you want, the delay you want?
Yeah, the whole split DNS design, you can have discussions as you want, and you can have solutions that get, I've had people have F5s that intercept requests, and then based off subnets determine where they're going to resolve to, and versus it can get very messy if your internal domain and your external domain are the same and you have a split DNS. It's simple. You just have different addresses inside versus outside. If you're a educational facility, higher learning, and you only have one DNS namespace and it's presented inside and outside, things get more challenging because, again, when we hit meet, where are we going?
It'll be meet.my domain name, right? My SIP domain name, which is something I have to own on the internet for external connectivity to work anyway.
Right.
That's the other thing to remember when you're deploying Lync and designing this is those SIP URLs, similar to mail URLs, need to be externally owned and facing.
Yeah, otherwise it doesn't work so well when you click on them.
You don't get the federation, you don't get all those things that you do need. So there's been a lot of discussion in the chat room about network and bandwidth requirements, and thanks to Rui for posting the Lync server bandwidth calculator that's been updated. Updated for 2013. There's a single calculator out there now that calculates for both 2010 and 2013, but the calculator doesn't do the work for you.
Right.
It still requires you to input how many users you have, what type of conferencing they're going to be doing, how many video streams, how many audio channels are they going to be using, how big is your conferencing load.
Right. You've got to create the profiles for the various users and what's going to be utilized and the numbers associated. Otherwise, how does it know what to figure out and what to use? So some of the questions here become then interesting too, because just because you have X amount of users, like the question, do your audio and video streams always send data?
Right. And the truth is no.
No. If you're not actively presenting and speaking, you're sending white noise, keep alive, but you're not sending it. You're consuming, you're receiving traffic.
Yep.
Same with your video. If
it's very asynchronous.
Right. You may be, you may not be. You probably want to kind of calculate for worst case scenarios, but it is, things do get much more difficult, truthfully, in calculating bandwidth with Lync 2013, because there's so many ways that we can use bandwidth now versus 2010.
Yeah, most definitely. There was, even in 2010, we got some of that muting and the white noise, but with multi-stream video, potentially 5 streams going out to every user in a high bandwidth HD request, it's still the case that we determine HD requests based on that maximizing kind of thing.
That's right, and client capabilities and the maximum set within the system. So it goes back to the policy discussion that Aaron was talking about, that do yourself the favor, configure the policies before things get out of hand, and whether they be locked down, whether you're minimizing bandwidth, whatever you're setting the maximum bit rate to. Different in 2013, we're setting the maximum amount of bandwidth available for a conference call or a video call. Set it before you ever get to where things aren't going to work, because when you get to the point where things don't work, people are very unhappy. So
most definitely.
Very
Getting back to that bandwidth calculator that Rui sent out the link for, it's a really helpful tool that in fact takes Excel input and outputs some data that looks a lot like this, where it gives you, what do my central sites look like? What's my WAN bandwidth necessary? How much bandwidth of that is necessary for the real-time communications? It's going to detail the same for your branches. It's going to start breaking out what your allocated bandwidth is versus your available bandwidth. But it all depends on you understanding and entering accurate data.
Yeah, real data.
Yeah, no, this is real data. This is, getting back to voice calculations, this is my Erlang numbers and my blocking factors and how many minutes of voice am I doing and how many...
Yeah, the nice thing is the Erlang
you don't have to know Erlang to put it in here.
You can be like, how much percentage of blocking do I want, the 0.1, the 0.5. You don't need to know that. It'll ask you questions, you put in the answers, and then it calculates the information for you.
Most definitely. So last is talking about just how dial-in conferencing works in this environment in a 2013 world. Look, it's the Lync web app, that thing that we've been talking about. But here's the important thing to remember. You're only going to get that Lync web app pop up if you don't have a Lync client installed.
Yeah, I think it's what's the word I want? Something to conceptually remember that there is no difference between a dial-in conferencing conference and a data conference and a video conference. That whole mantra went out with 2010. The idea was, we're in a conference and we can, based off your policies and rights, we can
add and escalate
as needed.
Modalities and bring those pieces in.
All things are available, whether you're just using the audio portion of the bridge or you're using video and data. Well, that's up to you and the participants. But but it's the same joint experience as any other conference because it is a conference.
Yep, most definitely. It is good to remember that joining from a known phone number, a Lync phone edition or a known phone number that is signed in as you won't get prompted for your authentication token and your authentication credentials in the conference because it will know who you are.
Right, and that's when we say a known number, this is a known authenticated number.
Yes, it's not your cell phone that's in AD, but it's I'm on a Lync phone edition device that I've authenticated to as myself. When I dial the conference bridge and join a specific conference, I will be noted as myself in that conference, and I won't have to have entered my conference PIN again just to do that. So the requirements for dial-in conferencing are a little funny, right? Because the application service, the conference attendant, the conference announcement service are just services on the front end.
They're actually, the dial-in conferencing is an application that's leveraging existing components that already exist.
Yep, yep. We do need potential for a load balancer here in that environment. It's good to know what the audio files that are transiting this and sort of what that looks like on the network. And a big important one that I've seen at a couple of customers is a unique phone number or extension assigned to each user. It was pretty common in some deployments to simply configure all users with the same phone number in Active Directory, such that when somebody gets called, right, an operator answers it and knows how to get it to the actual person, but that when they're sending data out or sending calls out, everything goes out as the same user. Or maybe they had a common number with extensions. So.
Yeah. Well, and it gets back to that policy we were talking. What's one of the PIN policies is tied to how do we identify you when you call in, when you're dialing into a conference bridge number, or you PIN authentication. It's your number extension.
And your PIN.
That's right. So if we can't get the you part of it, well, then nothing's going to work.
Yep.
And you actually see in the logs ambiguous user because we don't know who you are if there's duplicates.
Yep, most definitely. And in fact, other errors will happen when you're setting conferencing PIN. If your extension plus PIN together matches somebody else's in the environment, you won't be allowed to set that PIN.
Yeah, and we'll see that when we see mixed environments with 3- and 4-digit extensions, and someone happens to pick, so they're 1, 2, 3, and they pick 1, 1, 1, 1. The next guy gets in, and his extension is 1, 2, 3, 1, and he does 1, 1, 1 because only 3 digits are required. Well, that's a match. Well, that's not unique. We can't do that. The first person gets it, the next person doesn't.
Yep. Yeah. And they'll actually get that interaction.
Yeah.
So, really, you have a lot of options here when you're configuring that dial-in conferencing application. But the truth is, the most of what you do is through the control panel or management shell. And
the truth is, it's assuming you have voice working and you have a number that you want to work, it's a 30-second process.
It is. It's
instantly you have dial-in conferencing. It's awesome.
Add a conferencing region, configure a conferencing number, and guess what? It shows up in the invite.
And wait a couple of minutes.
2 minutes?
Yeah, as things kind of work. But it is one of the most fascinating things when you're on deployments and you're working with a telco group and you've
just give me a DID.
And they'll finally get you a DID. You're like, okay, done. What? You got dial-in conferencing. Just like that.
Yep.
Yes. So it is a very fascinating topology change within the control panel that's nearly instant. So.
Yeah, no, it's really good. Hopefully I'll be able to show you actually live. So last and certainly not least is talking about what the different options are for how you can manage and administer these different policies. And the idea is you're best off to manage your global conferencing policy and configure a restricted set of settings that you want to apply to everyone no matter where they are.
Yeah, it's your catch-all.
Your catch-all. Then it's very common that you'll deploy a site policy into one of your Lync sites. If you've done that, your global policy doesn't need to be configured because everybody will be in that site, if everybody is.
And then the catch being there, if another administrator were to set up a new site and not create a site policy for that site, global would apply. So that's where you get your safety net catch.
Exactly. And then last, for some of your users, it's highly likely, in most businesses I've seen this, that they'll give and turn on an additional set of policies for some of their executives and their high-impact users. Maybe their salespeople get a bigger, more robust conference experience.
We say executives, but we mean administrative assistants.
True.
And IT. Those are really the ones that get the power, right?
Or sales guys.
Sales, but IT, admin assistants. Those are the ones that get the roles.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So really about configuring, there are configuration settings you can do in Lync 2013 in the command list to configure those conferencing settings. And there are things like you can configure the content grace period. Right? You can configure the media port range and what that media port range is, what the audio and what the video port range is. We give you a lot of PowerShell commandlets that you can use to interact with the Lync server.
And for those three, very important when we're talking about QoS if we want it to work.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
If you don't care, well, but that's what they're for.
So we're going to take a short break now, and hopefully we'll be able to come back with a demo of conferencing. If not, we'll come back with another session for you.
All right. Before we go, can we answer a single question, which I think is an interesting one?
Sure.
It should be simple to answer, which is, can only parts of Exchange be added to the environment so that we can get some of this functionality, or must all of Exchange be implemented even if we were a Google Apps for Education shop for email?
So the truth is you need effectively every role of Exchange to be able to implement Lync server with voice and get the voicemail capabilities, right? Because the role in and of itself just records the message, but then actually needs the transport role to deliver that message to a mailbox.
Right. You need CAS to access it. You need. I mean, there's.
Yeah. And yes, you could technically do some work, and there's some ways you could do rules to have a single Exchange server with all the roles on it, maybe take all those calls, and for every user have a redirect, but it's definitely not a recommended solution.
Not only not recommended, you're not going to get near the user experience.
Oh, you won't get the functionality.
You're not going to get the click to dial in.
No,
functionality will be broken.
It'll be an email in their Google mailbox with an attachment, with an MP3 attached to it.
So, okay. And that's that.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a little while.